So today I'm here in Hong Kong with Derek Elmer. Derek is someone that I've known for a couple of years now, and I'm fascinated with the information that he has and the way he has spent his time in this part of the world. I think you'll find it fascinating too. So welcome, Derek, to Conversations 360 podcast and to this Asia in the West series.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So, Derek, let me start with this question. When we talk about conversations taking place between Asia and the West, what does that bring to mind for you? What does that mean?
I think it brings to mind to me a difficulty at the present time. I believe that especially China and the US are very wareful of each other at the moment, and I believe that the new administration in the USA has put China on a very, very thin edge in regards to politics. And they are very wary at the moment how to deal with the new administration in the USA.
How about on a non-political level? What about the communications, the conversations between, since you brought up China, between Chinese and Americans, or the West?
I think the Chinese have regular Chinese people, citizens. I think they have a strong urge to travel, and we can see that in visitor numbers in various countries around the world, including Europe and the United States. And I feel that the younger Chinese would like to get out and travel, and I feel that the younger Chinese want to become westernized. And as of recent, we've actually seen this a lot in India. There's been a lot of younger people from the age of 18 to 25 that have been changing from traditional dress to Western dress.
Interesting.
And have actually incurred some assaults on that, en masse.
You mean that people have attacked them?
Yes, there have been several large incidents of actual sexual assaults on large amounts of young Indians dressing up in a Western style, and the older generation seeing that as an invitation to take some form of make some form of attack to those people. But in regards to China, I feel that the younger Chinese have embraced a Western culture, and I feel that over the last 30 to 40 years, there's been enough wealth for businessmen or government employees to send their children overseas. And it's not just America, it's Germany, it's the UK, it's Australia, Canada, and we can see that the people that are returning to China really know how to deal with Westerners. So we can see that the average CEO or entrepreneur is much younger than maybe 20, 25 years ago. And this is a great advantage for China because they're able to do business with English-speaking countries overseas very, very easily. And this we can see even in the government. We can look at certain government ministries and see that some of the leaders in those ministries have actually had studies overseas, even up to military level, which is very, very interesting.
So when you look at it the other way around, excuse me, when you look at it the other way around, how savvy are Westerners about what's going on in China?
I think that any Westerner that has actually been to China knows that it's a very difficult environment to conduct any kind of business. And there is, in fact, what I would describe as somewhat of a red flag issue. Most Westerners, for example, believe that if they enter into business with someone in China, that the chances of them being ripped off are going to be quite high. However, looking at the size of American business and American culture, I would believe that there's probably more red flags in American business than there are in Chinese business.
That American businesses would be taking advantage of.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yes.
Interesting.
So I feel that America doesn't really know where China is at the moment. It's something that they're not sure of, and it's something that they're not aware of. All they know is China is a big manufacturing back garden and supplies lots of goods to the rest of the world that are of an inferior quality. But the truth is that they supply lots of goods to the world which are of a very good quality.
Indeed.
And that's an issue that I think should be corrected.
Well, in fact, they're unaware that China is actually moving from being the manufacturer to the world to a much different kind of economy.
Yes,
if they can.
Yeah. The domestic market alone for China is absolutely huge, and I believe they could quite happily live with much less export-driven market, which is what they're trying to achieve right now, because of their domestic market is just so enormous that they can live with just looking after their domestic market.
And the growth is just potentially exponential.
The growth, yes,
Yeah.
the growth. I mean, when you look at Chinese large cities and the new child policy, which allows
2 or more children.
Yeah, 2 or more children. The room for growth is amazing.
So what about this latest slowdown or turn down or downturn in China? Still, of course, a big, huge economy. Has that had an impact on the businesses with whom you work, on your own?
I don't think so. No, I think it's had an impact in certain sectors. However, I don't think that there is a slowdown. I think that when you look at some of the statistics in regards to electrical use and coal use in different parts of China, the actual statistics show an increase in the use of, which which to me indicates that the factory lights are on, the pollution is high, which means the factories are burning coal to make goods. I don't believe there is a slowdown.
So you think that these numbers are actually bogus?
I don't think the numbers are true. I'm sure that there is some of the numbers have been manipulated and will continue to be manipulated for many, many years to come, if not by the USA, by China themselves.
I see what you mean about both sides being somewhat wary of each other. So how does this, your business is so fascinating, and you know, in fact, a great deal of your business is getting data that about things that are happening or things that have been produced, et cetera, in places like China. Could describe that a little bit.
We provide our clients with information that cannot ordinarily be gained or is in Chinese, for example, which they are unable to read. For many, many years now, we were able to obtain information from various sources which were available if you knew where to look for them. But in the past 3 or 4 years, we've seen a great change in the privacy data ordinance in China, and we have had to adjust the way that we retrieve that information, and it has become much more difficult and much more expensive to obtain that information for our clients.
So could you give me an example, if you don't want to name a company, the kind of client that you would have and what kind of information do they want?
Okay, for example, if we had an investor that was based in the UK, which is a huge investor in China, and they wanted to look at the background reputation of the company they were considering to invest in, we would, dependent on the scope that we were told to look for, we would search for information in regards to previous court cases, in regards to issues of money laundering, litigation records, anything along those lines which in somewhere like Britain you could quite easily obtain through going online and searching for them.
Public records.
Yes, public records indeed. However, in China, public records have been tightened up. The Chinese leadership feel that these records should not be a matter of public knowledge. Hence, have brought in new rules over the past few years and in the past 6 months to tighten up and regulate the release of such kind of records.
So, Derek, what's the reason for that? Why do they want to put that stuff under wraps?
I believe that they feel that it's too much public knowledge is a bad thing for China. There's lots of skeletons in lots of cupboards, as we know, and I think at the moment the Chinese government are trying to clear out those closets, and it's very embarrassing for them when someone in power or someone in leadership of a first or second tier city is found to be involved in something that they shouldn't be involved. So lots of the rules that have been made over the last couple of years are actually being made for protection of China itself.
So this isn't so much to keep people like you out of there.
No.
It's to protect their records from their own people who are trying to do stuff with it.
Exactly correct.
So you probably have a pretty good insight into the corruption level in China.
Mm.
And we know that there's been this major crackdown. Is that what it appears to be? Is it really because we want to be rid of corruption? Is it the present leadership shoring up its own strength and getting rid of enemies? What's the deal?
I think it's the present leadership in a scrap with the past leadership. Corruption has been a part of Chinese business culture for many, many years. And I believe that it will be a part of Chinese business culture for many, many years to come. The power struggle that's going on between the old and the new administration has affected many, many people. And
in what way?
I believe that the effect that it has had on foreign companies has been quite largely due to the fact that you are unable to. The law is not entirely clear on what you can do and what you can't do. So there have been many cases of expatriate and even Chinese CEOs or staff arrested and detained and for long periods with no charges, and it's affected business in a way that has spread all the way to Hong Kong, I believe, with the so-called kidnapping of the booksellers in Hong Kong. It really has sent a shiver up the spine of many expatriates in Hong Kong that are involved in the same industry as my company, risk mitigation and on-the-ground investigations in China. But if that kind of practice can happen with booksellers, that there's no reason it can happen with investigators.
So could this be? Is it on the rise?
I can't say it's on the rise because something like a kidnapping would be very much of a public knowledge. But I do believe that the amount of mainland Chinese intelligence agency staffers in Hong Kong and Macau has risen to a volume not seen in the past 30 years.
Their own people investigating.
Their own people investigating in Hong Kong and Macau,
Really?
and looking at certain individuals. And when we speak about Macau, we have casinos, which goes hand in hand with money exiting, the renminbi exiting out of China and being used in Macau by gamblers. I could take you to a VIP gaming room in Macau, and I could quite easily identify the 3 to 4 intelligence officers that would be in that room, discreetly taking pictures and identifying what we would call sharks or even wows, playing the tables.
Really?
And
now I get the first
yes.
one. What's the second word? I know it's
the
sharks.
wows, just a bigger player. So we have the sharks and the wows, and there is a restriction on the amount of cash money that you can bring into Macau.
So these are people that may be disobeying the rules.
These are people that actually have chips available to them in Macau by leaving money to a third party in China. So
about so many fascinating.
It's very, very interesting, but that's why we're seeing at the moment the Macau income streams dropping by the most ever in the past 3 years, because once you leave the casino, and let's say, for example, you're the CEO of a state-owned company in China, you will be spoken to upon your return, and you will be dealt with.
The fact that you were there at all?
The fact that you were there at all, and the fact that you were gambling large amounts of money that you maybe can't account for, or did belong to state-owned enterprises.
But just so that I understand what you said earlier, this is not just to clean up corruption. This is really settling scores.
A lot of it's settling scores. I don't believe that they will ever clean up corruption. As I said before, corruption is a part of not just Chinese, but of Asian culture. And again, we saw a huge amount of corruption 5 to 6 years ago in Macau, with government officials selling land for advantages. And at that time, I was actually quoted by an American company that this was happening. And 4 years later, there were several arrests at very high level in government in Macau. And so I think that corruption is something that no one administration in China could ever stop. It will continue, and it will continue in large volumes.
So we talk about people taking their money out of China. That's increased, certainly, for whatever reasons. Is there, and some people say that the best, the brightest, and the wealthiest are leaving China. How true is that?
I think that...
are they leaving, or are they just taking their money out?
I think it's true to some extent. I believe that even in my travels in the past 6 months to 6 or 7 major countries, cities, all you see is mainland Chinese people spending money and buying luxury goods.
Real estate.
Real estate, exactly. And we can see what has happened in, for example, cities like Vancouver, with additional sales taxes, etc., etc. In regards to the real estate, I believe that a lot of real estate is actually brought very smartly, because when a Chinese family sends out a child to study, they don't just rent an apartment and let the child stay in a rented apartment. They actually buy an apartment. And after the child has finished their schooling, 4 to 6 or 8 years later, even after university, the real estate has increased in price and actually paid for the schooling. So the Chinese are very connected in regards to this kind of approach to overseas schooling, and tend to immediately buy a piece of real estate for the child to live in and to pay the cost of the school.
Sounds like a plan to me.
It's a very good plan, and the Chinese, being so well connected via social media, tend to be somewhat of a lemming, if I can use that word, in the way that everyone kind of says, well, this works, so let's do it. So
that would explain a lot of people investing in real estate, because it is connected to the educational interests of them and their kids, and it makes a lot of sense as an investment in general. Is there, other than that, though, are there people really leaving China and deciding this is the time to be elsewhere?
I don't think people are really leaving China. I believe that China has improved substantially over the past 25 years. it's actually not such a bad place to live. However, I think that some of them are getting the taste of the likes of California, or living in London, or maybe residing in Paris. And I think there are a majority of people that like to be out of China for maybe, say, 3 months of the year. But I wouldn't say there's a brain drain or there's a rush to get out of China. But with every Chinese culture, they all like to protect their wealth. And if protecting their wealth means buying something overseas, or investing in something overseas, then
why not?
Why not? Yeah.
So for those who remain, and it appears it's most of them, it appears that innovation, probably, I think you even said this to me at one point, has never been more important. So where is the innovation coming from? It's not coming from expats. We have fewer of those in China and elsewhere than we did in the past. Is it coming from these kids that go to other places to be educated and come back and end up running companies, or is it being homegrown?
I believe it's a combination of all three that you said. If we talk about homegrown, the Chinese always want to win. They don't want to be second. They're very naturally hard-working people. I have 3 offices in China, and my staff in China would stay up till midnight every day and perform overtime. Whereas if you compare them to my Hong Kong staff, they would not. The Chinese, homegrown Chinese workers are very, very hardworking, and I think it's a part of their DNA to be hardworking. Talking about the students returning from overseas, of course, a lot of them are given the chance to stay in the countries of study. However, the majority do return, and many of them are entrepreneurial, and they have the added advantage of speaking much better English from when they left. And I believe that their entrepreneurial spirit has also allowed China to grow immensely with new ideas that they have obtained from overseas. I wouldn't class the Chinese as having lots of their own ideas, but they certainly are very, very skilled in taking other people's ideas, and they don't believe really in the research and development and the spending of large sums of money when they can take the idea and improve it from someone else. And this has been a cultural issue in China, hence we see intellectual property right being 2% of China's GDP, which is amazing.
Yeah, it seems, at least I've been told, that now that the Chinese are coming up with their own patentable ideas, that it's much more of interest to them to enforce the intellectual property laws that they have in effect. Does that make sense?
I think that it's something that the Chinese government can actually do. When they talk to foreign patent owners and copyright owners and registered trademark owners, that it's almost difficult to enforce intellectual property right in China. In fact, I disagree. I believe that the government of China can enforce on any brands that they want to. Let's take Nike, for example. If the Chinese government wanted to, they could stop all counterfeit Nike issues in China. I believe that is true.
Really?
The reason I believe that was because during the Beijing Olympics several years ago, China actually made it known that no one should be counterfeiting the mascots or the merchandise for the Beijing Olympics. And during the whole period of the Olympics, while myself and my team were there, we did not encounter one counterfeited product of the mascots of the Beijing Olympics anywhere. Manufacturers were told that if they touched it, there would be big issues. And it worked.
So what you're saying is that could be applied to
That could be
everything,
applied
across the board.
across the board for anyone.
So is it not done because they've got other fish to fry? Or?
I think it's not done because it's actually a big part of China's job creation and job retention, and there's cases of towns cracking down in China, particularly small towns, where seizures of counterfeit goods over a week period have been to the value of $200 million US.
Really?
Yes, it's a huge.
Now,
huge
who's
industry.
behind those crackdowns?
That would be local government putting their foot down and maybe having issues with multiple brand owners who are not happy and may have factories in that area and maybe threatening to close those factories, hence job loss, hence unhappiness. And the crackdown has been beyond belief. The amount of seizure, whether it's handbags, cigarettes, or fake shoes, it's in huge amounts.
So when you said earlier that corruption will continue, will that particular kind of corruption continue if it's that problematic?
I think so. I think that the counterfeit industry will only keep growing.
Really?
I believe so, yes. My company is one of the most successful intellectual property right enforcers in China, and we don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Good for you, right? Now, a somewhat related area that I'm fascinated by is the pressure regarding privacy issues. You know, in the West, even though everybody puts pictures of themselves that they should think better about than making public, they do all that, and yet they have real concern about people getting hold of their personal data. That doesn't seem to be so true in China?
I don't think so. I think that technology has advanced in so quickly in so few years that there's a huge social network in China that is generically Chinese.
In other words, they don't need Facebook.
Exactly, and they have their own Facebook. So I believe that there is... Facebook does exist in Chinese, and many other kinds of apps and social network, social media apps exist, but they're only in Chinese, so the foreigners don't get to see what's actually going on for real, because it's in a language that they can't read or understand. And I think that it brings us back to the privacy data, which I think is definitely government driven for their own purposes.
So you said that corruption will continue. That's part of doing business. This privacy issue is somewhat related to that. Nonetheless, what's your long-term view on China? Is it going to continue to grow? Is it going to have? Is it going to be the powerful nation that everybody thinks it can be? Are you bullish about it?
I think that we are going to see in the next 20 to 25 years, which is a number of years that many people say. But I think that from my 30 years in Asia, just over the past 20 years, I've seen a huge change in China. And my prediction for the future is that China will become the major power. I think that we have all kinds of issues coming up with the USA, Russia, China, the South China Sea, and I do believe that there is going to be some fun and games in the next 3 to 5 years that will possibly lead into some form of conflict, and I think that the Chinese may come out on top. The way that countries are manoeuvring at the moment, I believe that the Chinese will come out on top of.
So when you say conflict, do you mean armed conflict?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
In the next 3 to 5 years?
That would be my prediction. In the next 3 to 5 years, there will be some form of armed conflict involving the US, Russia, Eastern Europe, and also China.
So you say, though, that ultimately China, your prediction is that China will come out on top. So what could get in the way of that? What are the challenges to that possibility?
Well, the challenge for China has always been the troop movement. They're unable to transport any of their troops anywhere. But as we've seen,
why is that?
Well, they have no aircraft carriers.
That's true.
They have one, which they've just pushed out the past 1 week, just for some maneuvers in the South China Sea. But they've never been able to deploy any troops. That's why Taiwan is still Taiwan. Although that's a small Taiwanese strait, they're not able to efficiently get their troops into Taiwan.
You think otherwise they would?
I think otherwise they would, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you look at the Chinese, they've never been involved in any major battles outside of China. I mean, they've got a great army that is well equipped, is becoming more well equipped, and it's a large army, but they have to scale that down to make it a better army, not just a large army. If they scale it down so that the troops can be actually transported to somewhere to actually fight, then I believe this is a game changer for them.
Really?
Yeah. They have to scale down for sure. And then they can enter conflicts, which they need to do.
Now wait a second. You're saying they need to do?
I believe they will need to do, because I believe there will be conflict in the next 3 to 5 years.
And over what?
I believe it will be the South China Sea. The reason for their maneuvers in the South China Sea over the last couple of years, which you can see have been very swift, for them to develop and build what they have done, is a very strategic move. And the US don't like it. The Philippines have now sided with, they're actually siding with China, as we know. And actually, of today, they have actually just announced maritime Navy war games with Russia. So we can see that there's a pattern there. That
China has announced this with its war games.
The Philippines.
The Philippines
has announced that there will be some naval war games with Russia, which is again very interesting when you look at the scenario in the South China Sea.
This is quite an interesting story you're building. Is there anything I haven't asked you about, Derek, that you think fits in to this conversation about Asia and the West?
I don't think so. I mean, all I can add to it is that the Americans need to be. There's always the face issue with Chinese, and I think the one good thing about Donald Trump, and I am a Donald Trump supporter, and I'm not afraid to say it. The one good thing about him is that he knows how to do business. So he knows that the Chinese will need their face in the end. So I believe that there will be a lot of rumblings, and business will be difficult for a period of time, I believe. But I think that we'll get an equilibrium, and the US and China will get on quite well if we're talking about economies. I believe that they need each other. And it's not just as one-sided as Donald Trump is saying. He's, I believe, just playing his cards in the way that he wants to play them. But I believe that both countries cannot live without each other.
So then where is the potential conflict going to come from?
The conflict will become from Russia. There's plenty of statistics that I could provide you with in regards to what's been happening in regards to defense for both China and Russia in the past 6 to 12 months. But Russia is the wild card for sure, because Russia's been kicked down the last several years, and there's an old saying when you're in a bit of a kerfuffle, and that is you don't kick someone when they're down. But the Russians have been kicked multiple times. when they've been down and out on the floor. And we can see in the last 1 week the deportation of so many Russian families. I mean, this has been going on for years, but not in such numbers.
Yeah.
And we can look at other events that the US have been putting on Russia over the past year. And I believe that Russia is at a point where they will no longer stand for this kind of treatment because the Russian administration as it is at the moment, and I'm not just talking about Putin, but the elders behind Putin are actually tired of coming second. So I think their push into Eastern Europe will be seen in the next 2 to 3 years, which will eventually end up in a conflict because obviously the Americans have troops already on the borders in Poland. They have lots of hardware and they have a lot of support from NATO. But the Russians are on the floor at the moment, so now they're getting themselves up and they're preparing for something in the future.
Boy, you heard it all here first. This is going to be interesting to follow. Well, as I suspected it would be, how fascinating to have a conversation like this with you, Elmer. Thank you so much for participating. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Susan.